Thank you very much for coming to the webinar. We'll start in about 2 minutes time. Maybe, yeah, about 2 minutes time.
Oh, I better silence my phone just to be on the safe side.
I am bouncing some messages off of folks in the chat. If you want to open up your chat, feel free to communicate through the chat. Let me enable the chat. I see the chat is not enabled, so please use the Q&A if you want to communicate with us here at Debate Central. All right, we'll get things kicked off. Thank you very much for coming today. We know that we're in a challenging ethical climate and we're all under pressure from a lot of different fronts. And it's great we can take some time to discuss some of the things that are really important. My name is Mike Klein, and I'm the founder of We Lead Comms. And on behalf of our partners at the Center for Strategic Communication Excellence and the PR ethics community, I'm proud to be hosting today's debate on one of the top ethics questions facing #comms. I now turn the platform over to our moderator from the PR ethics community, its co-founder, Jared Meade, who will lead today's discussion and introduce our guests.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you everyone for joining us today. I'm thrilled to be here as moderator and also representing the PR ethics community. I want to save most of our time for the debate, so I'm just going to start by introducing our panel briefly. We'll let them introduce themselves after that, and then we'll jump into our first question. So today I'm going to be joined by Dr. Shannon Bowen, who is a tenured professor in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of South Carolina. Here in the United States, where her research focuses on ethical decision-making. Also joined by Sanjay Mistry, who is the group head of communications and engagement for Odeon Cinemas Group, Europe's largest cinema operator, and is based in London. We'll be joined here in a few moments as well by Alex Malouf, who is a journalist by training, but is currently an in-house communications pro in Saudi Arabia, and who also has a long history in ethical issues in the associations and communities he's involved in. So I'll go ahead and let our panelists who are with us introduce themselves, and we'll start with you, Dr. Bowen.
Thank you so much. I want to thank We Lead Comms for inviting me and all the participants for being here today. I know your time is so valuable, so thanks for sharing a few minutes to talk about this vital issue. I also founded the Global Strategic Communication Consortium, and in that group, we have what's called the AI Ethics Advisory Board. So basically, that's experts on AI ethics who do consulting, media commentary, training of public groups and government agencies. And we're also publishing on this topic as well. We have the Handbook of Innovations and Strategic Communication forthcoming, hopefully in late spring. We're wrapping it up now. So that can provide some future resources for us, and I am really happy to kick off the discussion.
And Sanjay, we'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jared, and thanks again. Thanks for having me here. So I'm Sanjay, and I've had the privilege of working in comms for around 20 years. So throughout my career, I've worked across a number of European markets and territories, having kind of the overseeing responsibility for those areas, and worked for several multinational companies. So that's given me an insight into ethics and culture across different markets, which I think is something we might touch on today. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be part of this important conversation. So I'm happy to kick off, Jared. Let's go.
All right, so we'll start with our first question. So in your opinion, what is the most significant ethical issue currently facing the comms profession? And Dr. Bowen, we'll start with you again.
Thank you. Great question. And there's so many potential answers that we could talk about: wars, energy shortages, all kinds of things. But I look at things from a meta perspective. So when we're talking about AI, it's a technology that is rapidly changing not only what we communicate about, but how we communicate. And in that sense, I think the most important issue that we can think about globally is that we're experiencing a tremendous loss of civil discourse, a loss of moral autonomy due to tremendous amounts of monitoring by AI, by segmentation that then creates division. We're also seeing things like social credit scores being used to rate people's online activity, or people being imprisoned because of their online activity. And I'm not referring to terrorists planning a bomb. I'm talking about issues of speech, preference, and opinion that have all of a sudden become criminal acts in some societies. We also have a lot of AI monitoring going on, and the monitoring that we are seeing is not just your facial representations, but how you walk, where you go, how many minutes you spend commuting, or how many minutes you spend inside of a store. These things are used to target you very specifically through geofencing, and AI can monitor everything you're doing in a medical sense as well. So there are a lot of tremendous concerns about monitoring and the loss of moral autonomy on my part, and I think that leads to a loss of civil discourse. Having a technocratic society arising in front of us in which technology makes decisions for us is one that is at the expense of our liberal, pluralistic societies in which humanity has driven decisions and structures in the past. So this is going to be a radical change, and in my opinion, it's the biggest ethical challenge facing our future.
So as we mentioned earlier, when it comes to ethics, there's many different areas that we could delve into. So Sanjay, do you agree with Dr. Bowen, or do you think there's another issue that would be more significant in the comms profession?
So the comms industry kind of today faces a range of complex ethical issues. I think many of them, I suppose, and it touches on what Professor Bowen was saying, is rapid evolution of technology and shifting societal expectations, and the kind of heightened scrutiny from increasing kind of informed and vocal public. And so the heart of these challenges really is the responsibility of us communicators to balance truth, transparency, and trust with the demand of our businesses that we work for and the fast-paced media landscape. So AI has a big part of that, I think. There are, I think, other issues. There's disinformation, there's misinformation. I think there's an area there that we have to kind of tread carefully and work out what that is. And then, taking probably a level down from Professor Bowen is, I think in the UK in particular, there's a big ethical challenge around what we call corporate social responsibility. So things like diversity, equity and inclusion, and greenwashing, and what companies are doing in those areas. And there's probably a feeling with us communicators, we need to show the best of our businesses, how we communicate, what we're doing, but then what's the substance behind that? Is there any gaps? And that gap produces or creates an ethical dilemma for us sometimes.
And you both mentioned, Sanjay, you mentioned misinformation, disinformation. Dr. Bowen, you had mentioned AI. So I kind of want to delve a little bit into that because I know that's a big topic that we're all thinking about right now. And it seems to be the topic that's kind of pulled everyone into the ethics conversation. So what role do you think AI is playing in the misinformation and disinformation that we're dealing with? And then also the second question that would be what do you view the legitimate role of AI in communication? Because I know a lot of people within comms are kind of asking that question of how should we be using AI? Should we be using it? So I'd like to hear your viewpoints on that, and we'll go back to Dr. Bowen.
Great question again, Jared. Thank you. I believe that AI has changed the public relations and communication disciplines already, and how they are using it varies from simple use of ChatGPT to help structure a report or a proposal, all the way to profit PR, which is writing the actual comms messages that go out rather than those being written by a human. But there are a lot of concerns with how accurate AI is. It can also be used as an influence agent, and a bot agent is a traditional social media thing that you probably are aware of, influencing political campaigns, influencing government discourse, and so on. But now AI is able to make deep fakes, for example, that are extremely realistic. And this is something that someone with beginner level computer skills can do if they're using the correct AI by just putting a few video clips into this machine, telling it what you want the political candidate to say, and in a couple of seconds you have a realistic looking video. The problem is also that we have no detection tools yet for deepfakes, not that are publicly available. And so this can change political discourse. It can be harmless, a funny joke, right? But it can also be very, very harmful when you talk about politicians that have had Zoom calls with other politicians they think, and we find out that that's deep faked, and that has actually happened between France and Russia. And so there's a huge ethical domain and question for the communication sphere. And then there's also the use of how we as professional communicators advise our organizations or our management teams on using our own data or buying AI data. We have to remember that when we get AI data, we can be targeting people very specifically, but they may not want to be targeted. Another issue is that we have little understanding of who's in that data set and where it comes from. So the progeny of the data set and how it's trained may be extremely biased. It might be biased in terms of language, country, race, ethnicity, gender. There's all sorts of problems in AI data. And I can give you more specific examples of things I've encountered, but I want to give Sanjay a time to respond to this as well.
Go ahead, Sanjay.
Thanks. I suppose why AI matters, the rise of AI and data-driven kind of communications is really transformed communications to a level I don't think we've seen. But it brings those kind of ethical challenges, particularly around transparency, bias, and privacy. AI tools, if they're left unchecked, can embed biases, can reflect social, economic and racial or gender inequalities. So communicators kind of must ensure that these technologies are used ethically, and that any automated messaging or targeting is free from bias. And I think that's the real tricky bit. And also there's that piece around, as communicators, I'm sure we've all used AI in some form, whether it's the basic ChatGPT or whatever it is. And there's an ethical question in how much do you disclose about how much you've used AI in what you're presenting, whether as an individual, as a function, or as a business. And so, yeah, there's just a question there around that transparency, that gap, and that's where the ethical dilemma comes. And the other thing with AI is, I fear that if there's an over reliance on AI, it kind of erodes that human element of communications. The empathy, the creativity, judgment, which are kind of really critical for building meaningful connections with audiences, especially as we do lots of kind of data and stakeholder segmentations, and we understand our audiences. And if we just put it all into ChatGPT, where's the human element? Where does that does that disappear? Does it not? There's a real question I think we haven't really scratched the surface of to ask ourselves, that are we just I feel we're sleepwalking into over reliance of ChatGPT. That's right. We want to do something. Or let me just go and ask ChatGPT and see what it says, and then we can kind of build some stuff out. And I think there's some real helpful things with using AI. It can help you start a campaign. It can help you just read and quickly analyze data. I think where we bring a real difference is then we use our experience, our minds, our slant, and the experiences and the expertise we have to then craft those communications or those plans. And that's where the human touch is. And with AI, if we get over reliant on it, that bit will disappear is where I kind of think where we could be headed.
And let me ask you real quick, Sanjay, and Dr. Bowen, I'll let you answer this as well. But when we're talking about AI, we talk about all the positives that it could help within communications and where it could be used. But we also talk about all the dangers, from bias to deep fakes to stealing, or what many people would term as stealing, or using copyrighted material when it's pulling together content for you. So what would your response be to a communication pro, or maybe someone who is newer to our industry, who's saying, should I use AI? Should I not? Is it really worth it because of all of these ethical questions? And I'd really like to hear your viewpoint, because we hear a lot. Some people are saying, AI is nothing different than when social media first started, and we all were a little worried about where that was going, and now everyone uses it. And then you have those people who, are newer to the industry, maybe, who have grown up with social media and AI a little more than we have. And so to them, it's almost like second nature. And so they're using it a lot more. So what would your response be to whether or not we as communicators should kind of jump in with both feet and be using AI, or if we should be more hesitant and kind of wading through those ethical questions? I'll go ahead and let you start, Sanjay.
Thank you. I think that's a real tricky one. I think as communicators, when there is new technology, new advances, we eagerly jump in. That's kind of our nature. And I think that there's a slight difference with social media and AI, in that social media was, and it is, very channeled to particular audiences, and you're very much in control of what you're putting there, and then it goes out. Whereas AI brings its own version of what you're trying to input. So it's almost like an in-between. You want to have some information, you feed it into the AI, and then it throws out something, and you get hallucinations or misrepresentations of what it does. And if you don't check it particularly well, you go back to over-reliance on, is it accurate? Is it not? Where did it get its information from? And so as a young communicator, or someone who's very new to the industry, I think you have to use AI, because it's going to be part of our industry for the foreseeable future. So you have to understand it. I think what, let's say, the more experienced people in communication would do is help you build some guidelines around it, some frameworks of how you might want to deal with AI in your role or as an organization. And I think that's the way we would want to look at it. Without guide rails or guidance, someone would just slip into the kind of, let me just put it in and find out what we get, or let me create this video really quickly. So because they are inexperienced or quite young in the industry, they're not going to have that expertise or that experience of things that have not worked in the past or failed. And everyone's had a failed campaign or a failed piece of communication that went wrong, and they're not going to have that to go back on to suddenly think, is this quite right? They're just going to rely on what AI is going to say to them. So as those more experienced across communications, those guidelines, or as a business, we need guidelines and policies of the use of AI.
I want to bring us back to the question that was raised to convene this debate. What are the top ethics issues facing comms? And we're hearing, certainly this conversation is a lot about generative AI, the use of generative AI, and the implications of generative AI. But there's a hell of a lot more other stuff going on up there at the moment. I mean, from a technology perspective, the algorithmic aggregation of things like TikTok, in and of itself, regardless of how the content gets there, the very process is certainly huge. And then, the full range of activities around the coming election in the US, the wars, the political instability, and the other things that are happening naturally in the world and are being exacerbated. I want to bring Alex in on the conversation and, really ask you, given all of this, what are your view on, say, the top 2 or 3 ethics issues facing the profession at this point? Alex, are you there?
I am.
I could.
Sorry,
You're on.
Sanjay. Go ahead.
No, sorry, Alex, I didn't see. So you carry on.
It's okay. Because I'm just going to put my camera on in a minute anyway. So go for it. Go ahead.
Sanjay, why don't you give it a go?
Yeah, I think for me, some of the and it goes back to some of the stuff that I said right at the beginning. I think there's an issue around disinformation and misinformation. I think there's the whole side around CSR. That's a typical ethical issue. And for me, those two are really quite big in the area of business. And what we're trying to do is, as communicators and ethical issues. If a business is wanting to promote its green credentials and there isn't much behind that, as communicators, that provides an ethical dilemma of how much you really go for it and how much you don't, how much substance is behind that. And there are a number of examples in the UK of a number of retailers that have really looked at or really tried to promote their green credentials, and when you scratch the surface, there isn't a great deal there. And they're still doing. So I think for me, that's a real topic issue for me, and it also spreads into the DEI practices as well of organisations. And I think that's really topical, especially in the UK and across Europe too, where organisations are almost being asked to show their DEI credentials, and you'll see a number of organisations who will have staff networks or campaigns or a number of DEI activities and activities that they'll do to promote what they're doing, and they'll promote that as well externally. But again, once you get behind it, you'll see that their senior team is all still white and male and has no real diversity at all in their top teams or anything along those lines. So I think that for me, that's a real top issue for me, along with the disinformation and misinformation section. Sorry, I'll stop there and let Alex come in.
I'm going to agree with a lot of what you said in terms of who is behind the technology. Silicon Valley isn't really known for its diversity, which I think is going to be an issue. If you look at AI as well, Gen AI, a lot of it is very much focused on the English language. We've got to have more models in other languages as well, and this is already an issue with the internet. There is too much content in English. In terms of other areas, which then that touches onto, you've got cultural differences. How does an AI produced in one part of the world, sold by a multinational, take into account the nuances in terms of what people think, what they believe in, how they communicate, from let alone country to country, city to city? There are major differences. And then you've also got the legal implications as well. Each country has specific laws in terms of information. How do you manage that? You've also got the risk aspects in terms of what the AI is pushing out, because a lot of what the AI is built on, these large language models, it could be built on information which is incorrect. It could be built on information which is not only misinformation, disinformation. So, there's a lot of things we've really got to be mindful of when we step into AI and we start to think, okay, how do we use it? Even the most basic question, when you push data into the AI, to the system, where does it go to? Then who has access to it? I still think a lot of people don't understand this aspect of Gen AI in the models. You can have your own hosting on site, but if you're looking at ChatGPT, you're looking at a cost of a couple $100,000, which a lot of companies will not be able to afford. So we've got to be mindful, use the technology. Everybody wants to use it. It's going to make our jobs in many ways easier, but we've also got to be aware of what the risks are and try and mitigate those risks and take it into account when we're using the tools. Otherwise, we're going to be heading down a rabbit hole, which we may not be able to get out of.
And I want to kind of go back to something that Sanjay had said, and I think Mike brought it up as well, but you were talking about when companies have campaigns, or kind of their voice is that, we have these DEI initiatives, different initiatives, but they're not walking the talk, basically. And we're seeing, I know Toyota just here recently had mentioned that they're pulling back on some of their DEI initiatives. They're going to not be promoting those. Externally, they're going to focus more on, I think it was women in STEM education. So what are your thoughts as far as that ethical dilemma of, if we can't walk the talk, then we don't talk about it at all, or the importance of needing to talk about DEI and these other initiatives? So I'd love to hear kind of your guys' viewpoint. We'll start with Dr. Bowen again.
Thank you. Great question. I would say that we have to remember, whenever we're using AI, to start with, it was built on stolen data, essentially. Copyrighted information was used across the board by OpenAI and others that's not attributed. And so we're talking about a massive quantity of data that was misappropriated or stolen. It's also been built on slave labor. And so image coding, for example, has been done primarily in India. And some of these images are truly horrific. And people are paid slave wages, essentially. And so AI itself is a biased instrument. And we may have to have programs that offset that in our data. And we might not call them DEI or CSR initiatives. Nowadays, we're seeing things more like creating shared value initiatives, creating integrated value. These things talk to different stakeholder and public groups to find out how they respond to our questions, our issues, and our data usage. And I will just say, for those in this audience who don't know exactly how AI is created, you always have to disclose when you've used it, because it makes a lot of mistakes. And the way it's created, the developers are essentially writing algorithms that train on a data set. And in my research, the developers don't understand ethics, they don't study ethics, and they don't want to include ethics, because they tell me ethics is beyond what I do. I'm seeking algorithmic perfection or algorithmic efficiency. I let somebody else worry about how it's used. So that's somebody else's you. That you're the person, you're the stopgap for the lack of ethical training in the AI. And so whether you're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, social responsibility, the social license to operate of your business, you're the one who has to think about how you're using data, how you're getting the data, how it's incorporated, but also, is that data complete? Does that data reflect all of the diverse viewpoints that we would want to see? Does it have the requisite variety that we're needing in dealing with our customers and clients? And I think that's probably what a lot of people don't know. They seem to think AI is based on the internet, so it must be right. That's simply not true. It's always going to have some mistakes, some bias at this point. When we get to AGI, which is a general intelligence, we may have a different discussion, but that's, in my opinion, at least 20 or 30 years away.
I'd love to hear either Sanjay or Alex kind of your viewpoint on that question as well with Toyota. If you had a client who's trying to decide whether or not to push some of these initiatives out, whether it be CSR or DEI, and realize that if when you're looking at the company, looking at leadership, that they're not really walking that talk, what is the ethical issues of either standing up and pushing these campaigns out, or not doing it all and facing backlash from the public who may say, why aren't you talking about these things? I'd love to hear your opinion and kind of how you would walk through that with a client.
I can have a go. So I think what we're talking about here is kind of a misalignment between corporate words and actions. That's kind of what we're talking about. And I suppose the inconsistency between their message, the messaging you do, and the operations or the activity lead to that significant public backlash. In extreme circumstances, calls for boycotts or protesting. And I think as communicators, we have a responsibility to the business and to our senior leaders to kind of explain the crisis or the reputational damage that it could do to the business or to the brand. And so we have to kind of advocate for that alignment to be a lot closer. And also we also have to sometimes be quite strong in saying, just because one of our competitors is saying this and doing that, we want to do exactly the same. We don't necessarily have the stuff to back it up. So what can we say, and what is more viable for us to, as an organization or as a business, to say in this sphere of whatever it is, social responsibility, DEI, doesn't matter. What can we say that is much more accurate, that when people ask those deeper questions, and inevitably they will, we can back that up and answer those. It's not a race. And I think sometimes businesses get caught up in our competitors are doing this around DEI or, CSR. We need to show what we're doing, and let's take that really big, really good example here, but forgetting elsewhere in the world they're doing something which is really terrible, or they haven't thought about it. So I think as communicators we have a responsibility, and as senior communicators particularly, to help our senior leaders see that misalignment and see the reputational damage that it would do potentially to that business.
And Alex, if I can ask you, because being that you work in the Middle East right now, how when culture is so different there than what we're used to here in the United States and maybe in Europe, how do you walk that line where in much of the rest of the world, kind of how we see DE&I, how we see gender equality may be somewhat different in various parts of the Middle East? How do you walk that ethical line with clients?
Look, I think the first thing is, and I've always argued for this, as communicators, we need to understand the environment that we work in, not just the environment of the organization, but the wider society. Almost like taking the pulse. We've got to understand this, and we've got to bring it inside. I've been in many organizations where, you feel as if they never leave their four walls, which is, incredibly frustrating. Guys, we don't sell to ourselves. We don't just communicate to ourselves, but that's what you feel like. And you've got to bring the outside in. You've got to be able to articulate what matters to the society you are in and why it matters. You've got to make sure that what you're proposing aligns with what the organization believes in or wants to see. I think, Sanjay was saying, often it's a case of me too. I want to go jump in. I want to go and do this because I've seen a competitor do it. If it doesn't make sense for the organization, if it's not something you truly believe in, then don't do it. Be true to yourself. And even I think, with the AI piece, what we've also got to do, and this is sort of the blessing and curse of working communications. We've got to be the experts in this area. We've got to know what we are talking about. So when we talk about something, we come at it from the perspective of knowledge. If we're going to advocate for a position, we need to clearly state what are the pros and what are the cons. Because nobody else is going to do that. Everybody's going to come in with a particular agenda, a particular belief, and that's it. As everybody really should be the guardian of an organization's reputation, but we really need to think beyond an individual approach. We've got to put ourselves in a position whereby we overlook everything and state clearly, why should we do this? Why should we not do this? And put down the reasoning so that when we do go to leadership or the board, whoever it may be, we have a clearly formulated argument as to which approach we should take, with the pros and cons. Basically, we've done our homework and we need to show that to the people we are engaging with. Because, if we haven't done it, then I'm sure somebody else at the table will have done.
Well, we've talked, each of you have kind of talked a little bit about kind of comms and PR's role in speaking to the C-suite, speaking to the organizations that we work for, kind of leading that conversation. So I'd like to kind of get your recommendations on how best can we as an industry kind of advance within communications, public relations, a stronger, more universal place with the C-suite, with our organizational leaders in the kind of this age of AI, age of disinformation. What would your recommendations be? Do you think we have a strong foothold there? Do you think there's something more we could do? Sanjay, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think it very much depends on, I suppose, how much confidence an executive team has in its communications team and its communication function, how much they trust them on a certain level to bring them the truth, as Alex was kind of saying, and show them what could happen and those things. And as communicators, we have to build that. Then we're not going to get it. We have to really show our worth. We have to show why we're the experts in this certain area. Because we've all worked for businesses where everyone thinks they know how to do communications. But we are those experts. We've been working for a number of years. So we have to show our worth in, if you do it this way, these are the consequences. These are also the challenges, but these are the benefits potentially. And then once your executive team or senior team start seeing that on a regular basis and seeing what you're saying is basically what's happening, I think you start to build a bit more trust, a bit more legitimacy. You have that beginning to have that backing. There'll always be people within those teams that aren't always convinced with communications, but we have to kind of be quite strong. Where I think Alex kind of hinted on it. We don't necessarily always have an agenda. We're just there to kind of show this is what the situation is. Whereas lots of other people, depending on what department or the area of a business that they look after, will have an agenda because it helps for them. It helps them. So we're kind of almost like an independent mediator, and just kind of saying, this is what will happen. You guys make that decision, but this is what will happen. And it does take a little bit of time. It's hard, especially if you're new to organization, you have no history, you have no anything to fall back on. So you have to build up. You have to have those one-to-ones. You have to, on a practical level, have to make sure you know what each of those senior team member wants and needs from your function, what you're trying to do, and how you can help them, and build build those relationships up. Communications really is still a relationship business. You have to have those relationships. That's something that AI can't and won't ever give you. As communicators, that is what we have to do, and that's how really, in my opinion, you'd be able to, get a business to start listening to you. But it will take a little time.
Shannon or Alex, anything to add?
Sure. I've done some research in this area, and the top way to the dominant coalition's crisis, the second way is an ethical dilemma. The third way is having an issue high on the media agenda, a hot issue. Another is leadership and credibility gained through time with relationships, like Sanjay was just discussing. And so these routes to the dominant coalition are proven, tried and true, but the trick is staying in there. Once you've gained access through one of these episodes, proving your worth, proving that you see things from a holistic perspective. So you're not just talking about marketing, finance, R&D, you're seeing things from a more holistic reputational perspective. and that you can advise on ethics. You can advise on how publics and stakeholders outside the organization are going to see the issue, because a lot of times that's how myopic management gets into groupthink and makes big mistakes. And so staying in the dominant coalition is just as important as getting into the C-suite, but you have to prove your worth once you're given that first opportunity by bringing everything you have in terms of facts and analyses of reputation and ethical issues to the table.
I want to move on to some. Oh, Mike, did you have a question? Sorry. Nope. I wanted to move on a little bit to ethical standards, because just in some of your responses, we've talked about kind of the credibility that we go into the C-suite with. And in my opinion, part of the credibility problem that we have is just as a profession, we're not always seen as the most ethical profession, whether that's, I would say that's not true, but based on what you see in entertainment media and what you see just in the news with various scandals and things that happen with corporations, it tends to fall to us to take that blame. So my question to the panel would be, one, do we need ethical standards? Do we across the board? And is that possible, knowing that because we all work in different parts of the world and ethics can be slightly different or seen slightly different in various parts of the world? Is that something that's possible? Alex, I'll jump to you first.
Look, I think, put it this way, every country in the world has legal standards. I'd say 95% of them are the same. I don't see why we can't have, and we should be advocating for ethical standards which are universal, in terms of, truth, in terms of honesty. I just don't, I hear this argument in terms of cultural differences. Again, as I said, a right is a right, a wrong is a wrong. I do think, we are in, a particularly challenging time when it comes to information. What is correct, what is factually correct, what is misinformation, what is disinformation, and it's very, very hard to tell the difference. It is very, very hard to tell the difference. Likewise, when it comes to how issues are seen, we're seeing polarization, especially in democracies, in many democracies throughout the world. And again, it's hard to, I think, take a principled position on many of these issues. Some businesses don't want to, some business leaders don't want to. They don't want to be seen to be almost, as if they're in the crosshairs. But again, I think when it comes to ethics, I don't see why we can't adapt and stick to, some fundamental basics which would help guide the profession, and hopefully, no, I'm not going to say stop, because it's never going to stop, but reduce the number of times that we're called spin doctors.
And Dr. Bowen and Sanjay, I'm going to assume, and if I'm incorrect, please jump in and correct me, but I'm going to assume you probably agree. But I'd love to hear if you do agree that it is possible and that we should have kind of this universal set of ethical standards. One, what is your thoughts on why we don't currently, and who should kind of define and set those standards for us? Who should, as an industry, should we be looking to kind of set this this standard? Because right now, depending on what association you belong to, the ethical codes aren't all the same. Some actually contradict each other. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And Dr. Bowen, I can have you go first.
Thank you. I've done several studies of codes of ethics from across the industry to just the public relations industry. And we don't have anything that's entirely adequate for being called a universal code of ethics. I would say the closest we have is probably the Code of Athens, but we do have universal ethical standards. As moral human beings, we know what we need to do, what our obligation and responsibilities are. So I think we need to think about those concepts rather than trying to rely on a code that may or may not be adequate. Because as we've discussed here, AI is rapidly changing what we're doing in our industry. It's changing standards. But if you have a moral understanding and discernment already in a framework that you use, you can help to figure out what those standards should be without necessarily having to rely on the industry association, which then has enforcement or lack of enforcement problems. And then we know that people who violate codes of ethics simply don't join the association anymore, or they're, so we have a lot of issues there. But I would say, if you want to be a communication professional and charge the most for your services, be trusted by your senior management, you always have to do things with ethical reflection and rectitude. And that's how you differentiate yourself from the Hollywood press agent and there's a lot of negative out there, but be one of the positive that can prove your track record with building relationships through ethics and credibility that result in trust. Trust is the ultimate outcome of ethical behavior, and we want to build that trust with our stakeholders and publics as adding value to the organization.
Sanjay, anything you'd like to add? Oh, you're muted, Sanjay.
Apologies. I completely agree with what Professor Bowen said. My only concern, or my only, I suppose, slightly differing view is Alex kind of said, across the world, legal frameworks govern all of us. The problem is, as you get across the different boundaries, different areas, it varies slightly, and so then there's a clash between local ethics and legal frameworks, whether it's global or regional, and businesses will naturally take advantage of, especially if they're across a number of sectors, what they can get away with in one region to another, they're more than happy to do that. So as communicators, that ethical standard is quite difficult, because you're not just having a legal framework or a local area, you're also having potentially a multinational business that covers all of that and has a single goal, and where they can get away with something in one region which they know they can't do in another. More than likely they will try, they will do it unless they get picked up on it. So, and local associations, in the UK we've got a couple, they've got their guidelines, there is some enforcement, not that the enforcement side I think just doesn't work unless there is a global standard. I really don't think it works, because for all the reasons Professor Bowen said, you just don't be part of that association, then you're outside of that bubble. So I think until we find a really good way of effectively enforcing an ethical standard, we'll always slip into this transparency issue around there's a gap between what we do and what we say. And on a real human moral level, we all want to be on the same playing field. I just don't think that works really in business. It doesn't always work.
Mike?
Shift the conversation a bit, because we're heading into the last phase of the chat. There's been a lot of talk about standards. There's been a lot of talk about technology. There's been a lot of talk about, the nature of our relationship with the people that we work with. But I want to try to do a little bit of root cause analysis, particularly around, three terms that came up: groupthink, myopic leadership, and unease around taking principled positions. And I just want to see, in that context, which of these is the most relevant issue that we have to deal with from the people which we work for? Is it an honesty issue? Is it an arrogance issue? Is it a cowardice issue? A laziness issue? How do we see what's going on in the background behind all of these dilemmas? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Mike, I'm happy to jump in. Look, I've worked with some great executives. I've worked with some executives who haven't been the easiest people to deal with. But but they're still in the positions they're in, and I think the wonderful thing about communications is that every day is different. Every day is, a different opportunity and challenge. And, it is easier to say nothing rather than to say no. You've got to find a way, often, depending on the people you deal with, how to get your opinion across without damaging or breaking relationships. And again, that is difficult. That is very, very difficult. I've had, one CEO who said to me, I don't want to hear the word no. So I think a lot of it really is just down to experience and finding your way and learning as well from others who have been on that path before you. How do you get across your point? How do you make sure that it's understood while at the same time preserving and building relationships?
Sanjay, Dr. Bowen, anything to add?
I've done some research on that area too, and I would echo what Alex said. And I would also say I think that we need to be coaches in a way to our CEO without necessarily calling ourselves that, of course. I always tell my management students that your job is to be the question asking person. That doesn't mean you're not supportive of the CEO. That means you're protecting them from negative consequences. Back in, I don't remember the year, but when we had the BP Deepwater Horizon mess, I said we're entering an age of CEO hubris, which I think we have to be the checks and balances on that. I think we have to be the one who's always asking questions, and we don't have to do it in the way of saying no, but we can say, that is definitely a great idea, but maybe we should test it out with focus groups or a test market, or do some research to see how it might blow up in our faces through ways we haven't considered yet. And so you're protecting the CEO, you're offering another viewpoint rather than being the no person. But if you couch yourself as the challenger and the one who's looking out for ethics and reputation, it's a little bit easier to do that without them necessarily kicking you out of the boardroom.
Sanjay, anything you'd like to add? I want to give you an opportunity.
Yeah, just really quickly, I suppose I agree with what Alex was saying around it very much depends on the CEO and how tricky they are and what they want to do. It also depends on the bottom line for a business as well. But I also like the way Shannon kind of explained it around we have to be the question asking person. I hadn't really, to be fair, until that point, I hadn't really thought of it that way, but that's what we are. And that's how you can kind of really be that almost independent voice who holds no baggage to say, is this really the way you want to go? Is this what you want to do? And as Alex says, and I said earlier, and that very much depends on the relationship you have with your C-suite, your executive team, how much they trust. And a lot of that just comes up with experience, being able to be there at the right time and providing the issues and the guidance that they need at the right time. And you can build that up. And, that comes with experience, that comes with, working for a number of organizations, different characters. They're all very different. And understanding those characters and being a coach is very much part of it. Understanding those different sensitivities, those different characters and personalities, and knowing how to navigate yourself and navigate your way around them, and what's the best way through them to get the point across that you really want to get across. And that's something else Alex said earlier. So understanding that, and for you as a communicator, understanding your audience is really key. And that audience is generally a key audience for you. So understanding how best to get to them, whether it's like they like a really short, sharp email or whether they want the detail, you've got to understand what type of person is that I can get my argument across to.
Love those thoughts. Quick question, because I know kind of in the midst of this conversation, Sanjay, you had mentioned a little bit about kind of enforcing an ethical code. And I know kind of right now where the industry's at, we rely mostly on hoping that each individual kind of has their own ethical code, because to Dr. Bowen's point, We don't have to join associations that have ethical codes, things like that. So it really is kind of up to the individual at this point in the industry. But I wanted to get your guys' viewpoints on, should there be consequences to ethical violations within our industry, within just the general business community? And if so, to Sanjay's point, are they enforceable? Like, how would we do that if we don't even have kind of this universal ethics code? Because I know it's been argued a lot that, you know, each of these associations can have a code, but if at the end of the day, nothing happens if someone violates those, what really is the point of the code? So I'd love to hear your viewpoints. And Alex, I'll start with you. I know you haven't had a chance in a little bit.
Look, I love to say, you know, there should be consequences, and there will be consequences. More often than not, there really aren't that many consequences. I think there are, you know, outlier stories, you know, Bell Pottinger, what happened with them, and the PRCA. You know, the beauty of the profession that we work in is that there really aren't no barriers to entry. You know, you don't have to study for, I don't know, 6 years or more. Like, for example, if you're a doctor, you don't, you know, if you're a barrister, you've got to, you know, if you're signed off, or sorry, if you're struck off, you're struck off. For example, if you do something ethically wrong, it doesn't happen with our industry. And you know, as much as we would like there to be consequences, there really is, you know, no organization or no association which is going to be able to do that. So, you know, it's on my wish list to Father Christmas. But as to whether or not I'm going to see it, you know, I'm not expecting any of those types of presents anytime soon. Put it that way.
Dr. Bowen, do you agree?
I think it's very difficult to have enforceable codes in a field where anyone can call themselves a communication professional. And we see everything from sports media agents to music industry and entertainment. And then we have the corporate environment. Then we have activism and NGOs. Then we have government communications. So it's such a broad field. I don't think it's ever going to be possible to have an enforcement, such as licensing with attorneys or physicians. So if we don't have those barriers to entry, how do we enforce it? I think public shunning and making examples of those who have really harmed our industry is a good thing to be doing, because we can learn from that and we can guide others through those social norms around the communication profession by saying, here's what not to do. We don't create fake blogs. We don't lie deceptively, etc. And so if we have those standards, and those of us in universities are teaching those standards, it's easier to keep people within the guardrails because they're thinking in terms of, what should I do? Not just what can I do, but what should I do in this situation? And that's not going to keep everybody on track. We're always going to have scandals and bad actors, but what field doesn't? Even those that are highly regulated also have scandals and bad actors. So I think for us, making examples and learning points out of those bad cases is something that we don't do enough of in terms of offering norms and guidance for communication pros.
And I know we're almost at time, but Sanjay, if you wanted to give your thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, I agree with Alex. In an ideal world, yes, there would be. I just don't think it's going to happen. And as opposed to doctors, lawyers who take an oath, who go through things, as communicators, we don't do that. There's nothing for us there to do. So, you know, we only have our own moral conscience to kind of say, we stop at this line. But at the end of the day, and is a rather base thing here, but, you know, if your senior team or the business is asking you to do something and you're pushing back to say, no, we should do it another way, but they're insisting, you have a decision to make. Do I not do it, or do I risk my job, my career, all those kind of things? And in some respects, that does happen. And I think it's really unfortunate, but with communicators, we're left in our own dilemma of how far and what do we need, you know, how far do we push this, and when do I just say, okay, I'll do it. So yeah, that's kind of where I sit on it.
And I agree with you, Mike. I think right now in our industry, we have to, each one of us, kind of find those ethical standards for ourselves and that moral compass, and really kind of have a very firm foundation and know where we stand, to your point, so that we know how far to push when we need to kind of walk away. I know we're at time, so I really quick wanted to say thank you guys for joining us. I think it was a wonderful discussion. I think we could probably go on for hours on this topic, but I wanted to give it back to Mike just in case there's any housekeeping things that we need to do before we go.
Sure, I want to thank everybody who's been on the call for the duration. I really appreciate that. Want to thank the guests, want to thank Jared for his able moderation of the proceedings today. And most of all, I want to thank our sponsors and partners at the PR ethics community, which is findable on LinkedIn, and at the Center for Strategic Communication Excellence, www.thecsce.com. Thank you very much, and this will also be available on demand through Zoom, and it'll be posted on YouTube within the next few days. Thank you very much for your participation today, and next time the debate will be what's happening in 2025.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you later.
Mike, can you make sure that we have the link once you get this
Of course.
uploaded for us? I would love to be able to share it with my students because I think it'd be valuable for them to learn from all these different perspectives rather than just hearing me all the time.
Not a problem.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation and I enjoyed the discussion a lot.
Thank you. I really appreciate your participation.
Yeah, you have a great group. I will be popping in the future.
Outstanding.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you for finding your way into the call as well. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike. Apologies for being late. It's just crazy work season over here. It's just nuts. It's like literally you step out of one meeting and you're into something else. Thanks for ensuring that I could join in. I don't often do the calls from the car, even though I probably do them more than I should do. But it was a really interesting conversation.
Well, I thought you were fantastic, and I'm glad you were able to make it. I think you added a hell of a lot.
By the way, you know what I think we should do, Mike? As to what Jared was saying, I think we have Hippocratic oaths, we have other things. I think we should have a Mike Klein oath in terms of ethics.
Yeah, right. That's another conversation, but I appreciate the compliment.
No worries, but it was a good chat.
Good chat. Great to hear your voice again. It's been a long time.
Where are you now? You still in Iceland?
Still in Iceland, just bought a flat here, so I'm gonna be around for a while.
Okay, well, enjoy the Northern Lights, and I'm hoping we may be moving to the UK. Maybe I'd probably say in a year and a half. So, if or when we do move back, we will probably make the visit over. Jenna wants to see the volcanoes, and the guys want to see the Northern Lights, and and there's no other place to do it apart from Iceland.
Well, I mean, there are other places with more predictable northern lights. Norway has more predictable northern lights, but they don't have volcanoes. They don't have geothermal water. And what better place to see the northern lights than in your own hot tub?
Yeah, definitely, man, definitely. Well, good to catch up with you, and
Likewise.
I hope to see you soon. I'll be tuning into the other calls, the other webinars.
Outstanding.
All right then, Mike. Take care.
Thank you, sir. Have a good
Bye-bye.
evening.
You too.
Bye-bye.